Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to be taking a look at team building in Regulation I and kind of break that down for you guys in a slot by slot standpoint, so to speak. A little bit of tips and tricks along the way as well. Keep in mind there are plenty of opportunities and plenty of different ways to team build in this regulation. However, this is just kind of that quick way that I find helps me to get that initial concept in the builder. So we're going to start off in a double restricted format, guys. We really do want to take a look at our restricted Pokemon, and generally speaking, we want these restricted Pokemon to complement each other. Now, there are a lot of different options in terms of what does complement each other mean. We can take a look at typings, and you can do something like Kyogre and Zacian and say, you know what, the typings on these two are phenomenal. The synergy there is incredible. That's the way I want to approach this. The other way you can approach this is you can say, hey, I want one of my restricteds to be a big special attacker, and I want my other restricted to be a big physical attacker. That way they're not necessarily getting shut down by, like, let's say, I don't know, if you have two physical attackers, they may not both appreciate, you know, the Incineroar hitting the board. Not necessarily that having two physical attackers is a bad thing, but generally speaking, that's the way I do like to approach these type of restricted formats. Just have them kind of do separate things is another different way to do that as well, right? Sometimes people like to have just the restricted one be a little bit more of a supportive option, which tends to be stuff like the Lunala, the Zamazenta, and then you tend to pair those guys with the big hitters, in this case like that Lunala Miraidon team, right? Not that Lunala doesn't do damage, but it generally plays the more supportive role on this composition where, you know, it's got the likes of Wide Guard. Maybe it has access to Trick Room, and it's that kind of supporting option that does damage when it needs to. Whereas your other restricted, in this case the Miraidon, is doing that big damage right up front, right? There's tons of different ways to approach this. What two restricteds work well, and even honestly, guys, you don't even necessarily need to worry about all that too much, because if like you have an idea and you're like, yeah, I really want to make, I don't know, Dialga Origin Groudon work, you know. Like, you technically could go ahead and do that. It's totally acceptable. The rest of this team building guide will work just fine without necessarily this crazy support. But realistically speaking, this isn't even that crazy of a core. I don't think it's amazing, but like, it's definitely, I don't know, it was a thing in 2016 when I started. Everyone was like, yeah, Dialga Groudon's kind of funny. I don't think it was ever good, but it was kind of funny, right? But what I'm getting at here, guys, is you can pretty much pick any two restricteds you want. Keep in mind that you do generally want them to complement each other. But outside of that, it's not necessarily a huge deal. You might not see the same success if they're not complementing each other. Like, I can't promise you success if you decide to queue up Lunala Kali Shadow, right? Like, I just can't do that, right? Like, I don't think this core is going to be very good at all, but the rest of the team building guide will work just fine, even if you do decide to do something like this. However, I don't think this is a very strong core. Just gonna put that disclaimer out there, okay? Generally, you do want these restricteds to complement each other, but it's not the end of the world if they're just two strong restricteds. For the sake of the team building video, guys, I'm just gonna leave Kyogre and Zacian in the builder. I just think that's a good way to continue the team building. And in slot 3, you generally want a Pokemon that is either going to benefit from the two restricteds or complement the two restricteds well. In Kyogre and Zacian's case, I think that answer is Urshifu. I think it really just appreciates being here. It complements the Kyogre Zacian just by putting on big immediate damage. They can't protect the round. It's got 100% accurate moves. And you also just have the ability to now take advantage of the range. So not only does it hit pretty hard, help support the other two, but it also fits very, very nicely onto these range compositions with the Kyogre, and it just feels like the correct complement Pokemon. Other complement Pokemon, there's tons of them, guys. It could realistically be anything in this slot. I just put Urshifu, like I said, because it kind of fits with these guys. But it could be like maybe an Ogerpon, or, you know, maybe you want like a Proto-Synthesis Pokemon, like a Fluttermane if you're running a Koraidon team, or a Raging Bolt if you're running a Sun team, right? You just, in theory, you just want something that is going to complement the other two restricteds nicely in this slot, right? And generally, I think Urshifu is a very easy slap onto the Rain team, so that's kind of why it's here. Moving on, guys, this is going to be a pretty quick guide, in my opinion, I would think. This is where you're going to have your next two slots. And your next two slots need to support this core that you've now built, right? You have this core of 3 Pokemon, and you need to support this core. Generally speaking, this is where you're going to have your likes of Rage Powder. This is where you're going to have the likes of either Follow Me, Fake Out. You could also say Tailwind is technically part of this composition as well. So for the sake of the video, guys, I'm going to go Incineroar because that's your Fake Out, that's your Intimidate. That's a very good support piece in general. It's one of the best support pieces we've ever had in Pokemon, so I'll put it in for the builder for now. And you're also going to want to take a look at, I don't know, now that we have Fake Out, we have Intimidate, I'm going to go ahead and put a Follow Me Pokemon here. Just for the sake of the video, I will put Ogerpon. I don't think it's the correct Pokemon on this team. I'll just put a Moongus. I'll just put a Moongus, guys, okay? Other options here are, instead of Incineroar, maybe you go Tornadus, right? You get a Tailwind active. In fact, I'll do that instead, just for the sake of the builder, right? And you could easily put Incineroar. Incineroar could end up being your last slot as well, but we'll get into that in a second. But overall, this is kind of the concept that we're approaching when we team build in Regulation I. We're taking a look at those two restricteds. We're taking a look at what complements them. And then you have these last 2/3 slots to really support that. What I like with this last slot generally is I like to have a slot that actually ends up patching potentially a bad matchup. And sometimes that is just what I didn't have over here, right? Like, obviously I don't have Fake Out support on this team, so maybe on this team it is the Incineroar that would flow in, right? However, you also have the potential to, you know, maybe get a little crazy with it. Maybe you're running a Koraidon team. If I could type, that would be fantastic, right? Maybe you're running a Koraidon team. Maybe your core looks something like this, and all of a sudden you're like, you know what? I think having a niche Pokemon, something that can maybe beat, you know, the Calyrex Shadows with this composition could be very, very good. You know, maybe I'll throw an Umbreon onto this team, right? And you just get to have that Pokemon that fixes that matchup that helps support these other two, right? Because you're not going to be able to, in theory, have 100% matchups into everything across the board. However, you should have good enough matchups across the board with your two restricteds that there should be some niche mon somewhere that should be able to patch those matchups, generally speaking, right? Like Dialga Groudon as the core that I was talking about earlier may not be the best composition, so it may be struggling to find a perfect 6 and, if, you know, something that actually really closes that out despite being like a super niche mon. However, like really solid cores tend to have those Pokemon that fit that niche, and a lot of the times there may not be anything that's correct. Right? I'm just going to go back to Kyogre for now, right? There may not be one thing that is correct here. There could be 4 or 5 things that are correct here. It could come down to your play style, right? Maybe, you know, versus a team like this with these guys, you really struggle versus Trick Room stuff. So you want to put like an Imprisoned Trick Room Pokemon, and that's just going to help the way you play, right? It may not be the way I would close this core, but if that's the way you want to close this core, that is perfectly fine. And that's what I'm trying to get at with this last slot. It's kind of that, make this core fit you, make this core solve that problematic matchup that you're struggling with, right? Like maybe I've played these 5 Pokemon and I'm like, you know what, I'm really, really weak to Cali Ice. I want Incineroar, Will-O-Wisp, right? And I'm a balanced player, guys. My examples are obviously going to be pretty standard. Keeping an example really, really quickly that is kind of just like niche and unique is wild and not quite as easy to pull out of my mind as normal, but you know what I mean? Generally speaking, maybe my way to close this core of 5 is Instant. Maybe someone else's way to close this core of 5 is a Giraffe, is like a Farigiraf, right? There's a lot of different options in this last slot, and generally speaking, you want to utilize it as a way to close the core that fits you, right? And I think, generally speaking, I don't think it's ever supposed to be Umbreon here, but it does kind of look cool. It looks cool, so we're going to leave it for the sake of the video, right? And generally speaking, I could put an Incineroar here, right? And based on this method, like, obviously, this is already a pretty well-established team, but it doesn't change. We could technically run this right back, and I'm probably going to do that right now just as kind of an example. All right. Now, just to run this back, I'm going to take a little bit of an older core here. I like the concept of Groudon, and I like the concept of Lunala, right? I keep in mind my complementary restricteds here. 1, it's just a historically strong core. And 2, we've got our special attack, we've got our physical attacker, right? We get Wide Guard to help versus the Cali Shadow stuff. We've got a big damage dealer, and we've got a kind of more supportive restricted. Doesn't, like I said, you don't need to check all those boxes. You effectively don't need to check either of them. But I do think this is a very good core, and they do complement each other. What I want to do now is kind of take a look at this and say, okay, well, now I need to complement these 2 Pokemon. Immediately off the top of my head, I think Chi-Yu is actually very strong here, especially with a Choice Scarf, right? And this composition right here is effectively what I want to look at now, right? We have a Chi-Yu, which not only benefits from Sun, but it also complements the Lunala by allowing the Lunala's moves to be boosted thanks to its Beads of Ruin ability. And with that, we've got a solid core of 3. Now, how do we want to close this out? Like I said, this is where we want our tailwinds. This is where we want our redirections. This is where we want our fake outs and stuff like that. Maybe our intimidate if we have that. Probably not going to throw an Incineroar on this team, guys. We already have a TU. So Incineroar doesn't really make a lot of sense. However, we probably could get away with it. But overall, I think I do want like a tailwind mode here. So I think I'm going to end up going with a Whimsicott. Just as that supportive piece, really get these guys that speed control that Groudon and Lunala miss. I'm going to go ahead and put Groudon and Lunala with that speed control. I think that's a very cool option. And now I just I do want Follow Me. I think being able to redirect from Lunala and get that Follow Me piece to be able to maybe Follow Me Trick Room and maybe have like a Tail Room concept could be very cool as well. So I'm going to go with an Ogerpon here, I think. Ogerpon Rock tends to fit pretty well on these Sun teams. Now, if I didn't have a Chi-Yu, and if I could have potentially chosen like Ogerpon Fire to take advantage of these first two Pokemon, I would definitely not need Follow Me here. But since I have the Chi-Yu already, I am just going to go with the Ogerpon Rock. I think it makes a little bit of sense. I get Follow Me, I get the redirection, I get Big Tailwind mode if I want it. And I also get potentially, maybe I want to throw a Trick Room mode on this now. And this is where this last slot comes into handy, right? Like, I can do a lot with this. I think what I want to do here personally, at least with what I'm looking at in front of me immediately, is actually Ursaluna, right? So we don't need two ground types. Maybe that's a little excessive. But the way I look at this team right now, I wanted that Pokemon that could maybe do something in Trick Room. I wanted the concept of, I wanted that fast mode with Tailwind, Ogerpon, and these two Pokemon being able to go fast. But I also want to be able to slow down this game and be able to maybe get a Trick Room option up going with the Lunala into the Ursaluna. Now, this might not be a great team. Maybe Ursaluna is not there. But the fact of the matter is I built a pretty functional looking team in a matter of minutes, right? And by using this guide, right, sometimes, guys, you are going to have to deviate. It's natural. You're not going to be able to stick to this script constantly, time and time again. And I think that's one of the biggest issues I find with team building is people kind of get stuck trying to fit a script, right? People get stuck trying to go, I need two restricted, they need to complement each other. I need to complement them. I need my support. I need my niche Pokemon. I need my matchup check Pokemon, whatever you want to call that last slot, right? People get stuck into this script, right? And then people get stuck, and because they get stuck into this script, they don't explore, and they don't explore other ideas. But I think what these kind of quote-unquote scripts, with quote-unquote these guides help with, is the initial concept, right? There are definitely tons of other ways to build teams. Don't get stuck into saying that you need stuff like this. If something doesn't feel right, maybe it's just not right, and you can adapt as you test. But it's a very good way to get 6 Pokemon into Builder very, very quickly and start testing matches quicker. I'm a big player and a big believer in let's get some games in as opposed to how do we actually make this function and just theory everything out. I want to see how things work in games. I want to see how things function, right? So I'm a big believer in that. One other thing that I do want to point out, right, is you could have maybe a core that you don't necessarily know what your second restricted wants to be, right? This is something I do want to touch upon because sometimes, you build in this format and you're like, I really like Landorus Incarnate and Whimsicott as a concept, right? Now, how do I close this out from here, right? Basically, I'm going to try and relate this back to my script or back to my guideline that I just went with. So I still do need my 2 restricteds, but what I have here now is since I like this core and I know I want this to be the base of the core, I want Landorus to be part of that restricted core. So I'm going to use Landorus, if you're following my guidelines, as that complementary Pokemon, as that 3rd slot, and Whimsicott as one of my supportive pieces. So it's kind of tough to do this because there are tons of different options I could have on a Landorus Whimsicott team. However, I think something that strikes my eye with Landorus and Whimsicott is generally when I have Whimsicott in general, I think Miraidon is very good. And now I have a Landorus to help beat the other Miraidon teams, right? I don't think this concept is amazing, but I think immediately this is kind of how I would start building this out from the concept of the no restricted slot, right? Now I can take a look at, okay, what supports Miraidon pretty well? We have, the options like Calyrex Ice. We have the other option. There's some talk about Ho-Oh. I saw a cool Miraidon Ho-Oh team that was going around the other day. That was kind of fun. There's talk maybe Kyogre supports it well. And Kyogre's kind of cute here too, right? Because, you get the Tailwind support. You now get Sandsear that's 100% accurate. So for the sake of the video, I might just go Kyogre, right? It also complements Miraidon by breaking the opposing ground types, which is pretty cool. The only thing I see with this immediately is that my grass types are going to be a huge problem for me. Like opposing grass types are going to suck to go up against. So maybe you want to close that off with these last two, right? But that's kind of how I would approach this from the other side, like when I don't have my restricted, but I know what I want to run beside them. And you just kind of build it out. And now, like I said, now I have my two restricted. They seem to complement each other fairly well. I have my complementary restricted that supports these guys. That's my core of 3. And then I start already with one of my supportive pieces, and then I just finish it off with another supportive piece, and whatever you may want to use in that last slot, that niche slot, that kind of the wild card slot, so to speak, right? But with that, guys, that's pretty much going to do it for the video. I did want to keep this short. Like I said, there are infinite different approaches when it comes to team building, and nothing is necessarily correct. But hopefully, maybe if one of you maybe were struggling or just looking for a different way to approach team building, hopefully this was able to spark some ideas for you and just kind of give you that different aspect on how to really approach team building. And I like doing this a lot sometimes. In fact, I'll do this myself just at the beginning of formats. I will just, fire off like 4 or 5 different compositions of teams, and then I just have 5 teams that I'm able to test and see what's going on with, right? Obviously, it's not like you're not going to build like amazing teams like this immediately, but it does give you amazing cores to start with. And like, you start strong, right? You start with a strong core and then you go from there, right? Now, maybe you have like a really niche mon, you can go ahead and go with that as well, right? Maybe you want to make, I don't know, Obama Snow work or Sarah Ledge work, right? And then you just do the exact same thing. What restricted would Sarah Ledge support? What can the restricted do for Sarah Ledge, right? Just kind of what do you go with there? Kind of build that one out that way, right? Different ways to approach different matchups I think is very cool as well. But like I said, it's a very quick approach to team building, and it's a very good way to get a very strong skeleton of a team built up in a matter of minutes. After that, it really just comes down to testing. And like I said, there's obviously, the different approaches. You can build the whole full-on theory mode. You can build, I just like putting things into Builder and playing some games. I'll know pretty quickly if something feels good or if something feels something feels off. So I don't know. That's kind of the way I like to approach team building. I know I rambled here a little bit at the end, but hopefully you guys kind of get the concept, and hopefully this was helpful. If you guys are enjoying these types of videos, please feel free to leave a like and subscribe. It really does help out the channel, and of course, I really do appreciate it. But with that, I'm going to get on out of here. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll catch you all in a future video.